Welcome to Doing, Being, Thinking, Dialectical Behavior Therapy skills for making a life worth living. I'm your host, Eric Nykamp, a therapist and clinical director at the Grand Rapids campus of Adolescent and Family Behavioral Health Services, a mental health practice with campuses throughout the great state of Michigan. Hello, everyone. Welcome to Doing, Being, Thinking, a podcast exploring the what, when, and how of using dialectical behavior therapy skills for making a life worth living. My name's Eric. I'm a DBT therapist and one of the clinical directors at Adolescent and Family Behavioral Health Services. And in today's episode, we're going to be talking about being effective. And joining me today is my good friend Sam, one of the other therapists here at Adolescent and Family. How are you doing this morning?
Pretty good. How are you?
I'm doing pretty good too. So let's start off with this conversation about being effective by talking about what does it mean to be effective as a mindfulness skill? Well, what does that mean?
To me, being effective is thinking about accomplishing what it is you set out to achieve.
So when you think about things in your own life like that, when do you notice that you're being effective?
Well, I notice that I'm being effective when I'm taking into account the circumstances, the whole context of where I'm trying to accomplish my goal, because I have also noticed that sometimes it requires different tactics depending on the setting that I'm in.
Absolutely. Yeah, me too. I find that there's some settings where it's really easy to be effective, and other settings where it is a lot of work.
Sure.
It is a ton of work. Yeah. So if you are in DBT and you have that big book and you're looking in there, sometimes when we talk about being effective, we'll talk about being mindful of your goals. Mm-hmm. So as you're listening to this, you're thinking like, okay, I don't usually think of myself as like being effective or ineffective. It might be that you're thinking about what are your goals in a situation? Mm-hmm. And how can you effectively move towards achieving those goals or getting closer to them? Mm-hmm. So I think sometimes that's a little part of it too, is to be mindful of goals.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely.
There's one other part of being effective. I don't know if you ever think about this, but sometimes we'll talk about doing what works or not sitting on our hands. And I don't know, can you relate to that? Because there's times for me where I know what somebody wants from me, for example, but I'm not really into it. Mm-hmm. Or I think like, I just don't want to right now. So I might comply. I might do what they want, but I'm going to kind of drag my feet doing it. Mm-hmm. So it looks like I am moving towards the goal, but what I'm really doing is I'm moving as slowly as possible towards it, maybe resisting along the way. Mm-hmm. And being effective is going all the way. It's not dragging your feet. It's not being stubborn or resistive. Mm-hmm. It's saying, if this is the goal, I'm moving towards the goal with all of me. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I think that it ties in a lot with the other mindfulness skills. It's hard to think about it in an isolated way.
Absolutely.
But what I hear you talking about is participation too, fully participating, jumping yourself in. Yeah.
I always think about when I was a little kid, my mom tells me these stories of the way I acted. And so apparently I was a huge pain in the butt. And so there would be a lot of times where I would, go boneless if she wanted me to go do something. And I'm like, sometimes as adults, I kind of feel like we are those 3 and 4-year-old children, just in a little more sophisticated packaging where we're letting people know we don't want to, even though it might look on the surface like we're going along with it. Mm-hmm.
Sure.
Like, you so know I do that sometimes. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Well, let's talk a little bit about when might people want to be effective? And what are some situations that either you've heard from other people you've talked to or maybe observed in yourself where being effective is really the thing that you want to do?
One thing that comes to mind is when well, I think of parenting really, wanting
There we
to be
go.
effective with parenting. Yeah. Um, and thinking about that coming really through trial and error sometimes. You don't always know when you might be reinforcing a behavior that you don't want to see continue.
Mhm.
And I have kind of a silly example for that, which isn't parenting children, but thinking somebody told me a situation with a pet. Um, and so this person had a cat, and her cat would always scratch at the bedpost. Um, and she did not like that because the bedpost got torn up as a result. And so when she got a second cat, she went in with the mindset of, I'm really going to do everything I can to discourage the cat from scratching at the bedpost. And so what she would do every time the cat would scratch at the bedpost, she would bring the cat outside. It was an indoor outdoor cat. So she would bring the cat outside, thinking that she was redirecting the behavior, not reinforcing it. But what came to happen is the cat learned when I scratch at the bedpost, that's how I go outside. So
Yeah.
if I need to go outside, this is how I can communicate that. So she had every intention of being effective, but the actual outcome she learned was that her interactions were not effective in her goal, which was to not reinforce the behavior from the cat. So I think about that a lot. That requires a lot of mindfulness and awareness to be constantly evaluating what was my goal and is what I'm doing actually achieving that goal, even when the intentions made a lot of sense.
That's such a good example. I think a lot of people can relate to that. I think of times where I'd want to be effective with relationships that it's really similar. Like I've had to work on my marriage for all the years that I've been married. I've been married almost 25 years. And so there's been a lot of change during that time. The person I was when I first got married, it's very different from the person I am now. I've had to think about what's going to get me towards my goal of having a better relationship. And some of the things that I've tried, they didn't end up working like I thought they would. Lots of
Mm-hmm.
miscommunication. Um, Sometimes new situations will come up. Like there was a time where we were married with no kids, and then we had kids, and it's like, oh my gosh, how can I stay effective having a good relationship when I'm sleep deprived all the time? And then, sure enough, those kids grow up and they become teenagers. Well, that's a whole different stress. How do we relate to each other with teenagers who have really busy schedules and sometimes are mouthy or they're also ineffective in communicating what they want? And we're startled and surprised. How do you stay loving towards somebody when you're both tired that way?
Mm-hmm.
And it's always thinking about what's the goal. Well,
Mm-hmm.
a little part of me might say, like, I want to let people know how frustrated I really am.
Yeah.
Okay, well, if I just unload on somebody, what's the chances that they're going to think that I'm a great marital partner? Oh, probably pretty low.
Mm-hmm.
Right. So it's like, oh, so I can't just unload when I'm feeling something really intensely, even if it
Mm-hmm.
makes sense why I'm feeling it.
Mm-hmm.
I have to do something else. I need to moderate the way I express my emotions to my wife because she's not the receptacle for every bad mood that I'm in.
Mm-hmm.
And it takes work.
Yeah. What you shared made me think about how sometimes we have multiple goals and we have to figure out which one is bigger too. Like you talked about your goal of being an effective partner with your wife, but then you mentioned like, well, there's a small part of me that has this goal of basically releasing my emotion in some way. And so having to think about, okay, well, which goal supersedes here? And also, is it possible that I can come up with something that will meet both goals? Can I release my emotion in a healthy, appropriate way that still maintains the relationship with my wife? If not, then I have to decide which one to prioritize.
I hear a lot of people talk about this one where they say, one of my goals is problem solving. I want to problem solve with this other person. The other one is I want to let them know how I'm feeling.
Yeah.
And both of those are really important pieces of information. Like if you care about somebody, you care about solving problems with them, but you also care about them and how they're feeling. And to figure out, how do I do both of these things? Does one wait for the other? Do we do one first, then the
Yeah.
other?
Yeah.
And it takes skill, and you'll probably make some mistakes on the way. I think these are really hard moments sometimes in therapy too, when people come in and talk about those competing desires.
Yeah.
And to kind of realize, like, okay, sometimes I have to put one of my desires on the back burner for a while or for a season. Sometimes it means I have to learn how to wait better, or I need to learn how to express myself at a low level of intensity because people don't know what to do when I express myself at a high rate of intensity. I had someone the other day tell me this story about they were expressing themselves, and what they were trying to do, their goal was, I want to tell people what I'm thinking because I keep so much inside. And then what they observed is that the person that they were telling wasn't saying anything. So the story they told themselves is that this other person doesn't care and they're not trying to be helpful. And maybe we're not a good match. And then we were looking at it, we're like, well, what are the reactions that people typically have to stress? It's like, okay, there's fight, there's flight, there's freeze, sometimes there's fawning. It's like, well, which one do you think the person you're talking to is experiencing? They're like, oh, maybe they were having freeze.
Sure.
Oh, okay. So then the new effectively thing was, well, knowing that I'm talking to somebody who, when things get intense, they experience freeze and they shut down. Well, I'm going to need a different strategy to talk to that person because I don't want them to shut down, because then they're not helpful to me. I feel unloved.
Yeah.
And to think like, what needs to be effective now? That's going to take a different strategy. It's not just sharing what I'm thinking instead of holding it inside. It's sharing how I'm thinking in a way that this other person can hear me and stay engaged.
Yeah.
It's the tough stuff.
Yeah.
Well, how do you do this skill? Like if you were in a moment where you thought to yourself, I need to be effective here, what would be some things that you would do or things that you would think about as you were doing the skill?
Again, I think that I pair this skill with some other skills.
Absolutely.
Like the first thing that comes to mind is the stop skill. I think the first thing that I need to do is pause and assess. I need to give myself time to assess those questions that we've been talking about here. What are my goals? What do I need to keep in mind, like you shared, about the person, or what I know about this person? What am I learning about this other person and how I can be effective in my relationship with them? I also often think about, okay, when have I been in a similar situation in the past? What did I do? Did it work? Did it not work? What can I do differently this time? And then, like I had kind of shared at the beginning, thinking about the context is always important. Being effective in my personal relationships at my house looks different than being effective in my relationships with my colleagues, my professional relationships. Being effective with my boss looks different than being effective with my equals or even my clients, which is still within the professional realm, but my role is shifted. So I have to just think about different factors.
Yeah. I think those factors to consider are really, those are really good. You listed a really good list there too. I also, when I'm trying to be effective, I also try to pause. I think that is a really important skill to just figure out how to pause, especially if you're in a situation that you've been frustrated in before and you don't want to, the definition of crazy is like doing the same thing over and over
Mhm.
and getting and expecting a different result. I do that. Sometimes I just think like, oh, maybe I just need to do it a little bit more or push a little bit
Yeah.
harder. And you're like, oh, well, surprise. Like I'm getting the same result over and over. It takes a little humility to recognize that that's what we're doing.
Mhm.
Like, oh, I keep ending up in the same place. People don't want to talk to me, or people are walking into a different room, or they're going on their phone. If it's like a
Mm.
relationship thing, like, oh, that keeps happening. I wonder of the part of the problem that I can control, what can I do to be more effective?
Mhm.
And I think thinking about it is that first step, right?
Mhm. And then I think of another skill that I often pair it with would be pros and cons. Um, Talking about the long-term benefits, like when we were talking about competing goals, you have to assess what are the pros of maybe acting on my urge here, which might be to blow up in
Yeah.
frustration. Well, there is a pro, right? I am releasing that frustration. But what are the cons? Well, it probably will damage the relationship. And if this relationship means something to me, then the con outweighs the pro in that circumstance.
I love using pros and cons in these kind of situations too, because I think it's also validating that there are some pros.
Yes.
Like you can have some real compassion for things like, well, I felt like I like stood up for what I wanted. And that gave me like the sense of accomplishment that I said this or I said this thing that I really have been keeping a secret for a long time. And to have some real compassion for those kinds of needs that they
Hmm.
are needs.
Hmm.
It's just putting it in the hierarchy of what is the highest need
Yes.
and thinking through what is my highest need here? What is my highest goal?
Yes. I always emphasize that with clients too, that it's important because sometimes you can look at a situation and it can seem almost obvious. Like, well, yes,
Right.
obviously the cons outweigh the pros here. But it's almost a little form of self-validation to talk about, well, why do you have this urge in the first place? It must be getting you something.
Mhm. Yeah. I notice people say things like, well, I know this is really stupid, but, or this really doesn't make sense, but,
Yeah.
and those are those little moments where I like to like say, okay, well, let's just pause a second. Like, is it really stupid or does it really not make sense? Because I think you wouldn't do it if that was the case. I think
Right.
there's a reason that it makes sense you're doing this. It just might not be effective,
Yes.
but it makes sense too.
Hmm.
Well, what do you think would get in the way of being effective?
I think it's really comes down to those urges and how much you can manage them, how
Yeah.
skillful you are in regulating your emotions. And I think we'll all mess up a lot of, not a lot of the time, but we'll all mess up sometimes.
Yeah.
Um, and so we will act on those urges without taking the pause that we would need to in order to be effective. I think that's one of the biggest things that gets in the way. Another thing is sometimes the other person's the part of the problem that you don't have control over, to use your language, the other person's reaction. Again, if we're going back to trying to be effective in a relationship, well, I can't predict necessarily how well the other person is going to be regulating their emotions. Is that going to make me feel more dysregulated when they respond a certain way? I think some of those variables that we can't control also get in the way. And then I also think of just kind of the stuff of life. Like you had mentioned, being sleep deprived. Well, that's a factor that I need to take into account here. And I'm not going to be as skillful when I'm sleep deprived. If hungry is another one, just those kinds of things can sometimes get in the way of being effective.
I think one of the things, sometimes we'll say this in DBT, that urgency is the enemy. And for me, a lot of times when I experience my own urgency, there's also a lot of intensity with that.
Yes.
And that self-awareness, sometimes that we get from doing diary cards or other forms of awareness building, to get better at noticing how intense is my emotion, how intense is my urge right now. An example in my own life is like sending a text when I'm mad. And I think what I'm doing is telling people what's going on inside of me, giving them information. How it usually comes across, though, when I'm feeling that, is the feedback I get would be, oh, you blew me out of the water. That was way too long. I couldn't take that all in. Huh. Okay. So I'm not communicating what's going on inside. What people are getting is that I'm super angry. And I've gotten that feedback enough times and felt enough regret about that I've started using another skill, the cope ahead skill, which is, wow, I've made the same mistake a bunch of different times. This is how I want to handle it next time. And I have a plan. So one of the plans is whatever you want to say, write it in Notes app.
Yes.
And if it's something I wanted to send to somebody else, I'll probably have my wife read it. And she can tell me if that's a great idea or not. Almost always, it's not a good idea. I mean, at some point, the cope ahead will be, if you think maybe you shouldn't, maybe you shouldn't. But that intensity, that urgency, that can really get in the way. Sometimes it comes from surprise. Like if you're startled or surprised, you talked about like, oh, the events are ongoing. I think it's very difficult to anticipate being surprised, because being surprised by definition is that you didn't anticipate it.
Right.
And also to perhaps practice what you would do if you were surprised. So if it's like a parenting thing, it's like, well, I found out for myself when my kids were yelling when I was at that stage of parenting. If I walk in the front door and they're screaming, I would usually become dysregulated. Well, I could not predict when my kids would scream, but I could anticipate that at some point they would scream. And so to kind of recognize this is a not super common, but once in a while experience that I need to just have a plan for.
Yeah.
Which was usually, I might need to put on headphones. I trust me, I could still hear them screaming. I'll know. It's like they're very accomplished screamers. But that was my workaround. And there's lots of workarounds.
Yeah.
Well, how would you think that being effective helps a life worth living?
I think it really comes down to, because being effective is one of the best ways to achieve your goals. And typically people set their goals in line with what they would picture as a life worth living. That's how I see the connection. To take your example of, okay, I want to maintain this relationship. It's really important to me. But also, I feel frustrated in this moment, and I have maybe an urge to express that with words in a text message. But thinking about, okay, well, what do I picture in my life worth living? Do I picture being the type of person who blows up, sends these messages, and then damages a relationship? Or do I picture maintaining my marriage, keeping, a healthy partnership, all of those pieces. So I really think it's just about how you can apply being effective to achieving your life worth living.
Yeah. I think even that phrase, like a life worth living, achieving better relationships with people. I heard someone who is a happiness researcher this week. He was talking about happiness isn't something that you own. It's found in relationships that you have. And that much of life's happiness comes from the relationships we have. Well, being effective helps us have better relationships, helps us, get our needs met, those sorts of things. Yeah.
When it comes to how being effective can help you achieve a life worth living, I think it's also helpful to think about what would be the opposite of being effective. Well, it's typically those things that we're already doing, acting on those urges that we found aren't working for us. And we're seeking out DBT treatment because we're realizing this is not the life that we want. And so we need to think about, what would I do differently to be more effective and get the life that I want?
Yeah. When I hear you say that, it makes me think of wisdom. Like, I think wisdom is both knowing what works, but also what we are likely to do that won't work.
Yes.
And so many of our impulses actually really do work. They keep us alive. They help us react in emergencies. They help us express our needs and our feelings. And then once in a while, there's a few that aren't so great. And it's really wonderful that we can step back and realize this isn't working like I wanted it to, but here's this thing that could.
And I think that's where context comes in too, because the things that you talked about, those impulses that we have, they do keep us alive in certain circumstances.
Yep.
But then in other circumstances, you mentioned the responses that we have to stress, the fight, flight, freeze, and fawn responses. And thinking about, those responses are there for a reason. They help keep us alive in emergency situations. But a lot of times we might be experiencing stress that's not a true emergency. And so having that response is not necessary and sometimes does damage.
Yeah. Yeah, you're so right. So, Sam, this was so fun to talk with you about this today. I really appreciate it. We hope that this episode helps all of you listening understand a bit more about being effective. While it can take a lifetime to master any skill, with practice, it's going to get progressively easier over time. And certainly with effectively, you got to make some mistakes along the way. So we hope that all of you continue doing, being, and thinking in wise ways on your way to making a life worth living. Sam, it was great talking with you today. Let's do it again soon.
Sounds good. Thanks.
All right. Thanks for listening. Doing, Being, Thinking is an educational podcast about dialectical behavior therapy and is not intended as a substitute for therapy. This is a podcast outreach of adolescent and family behavioral health services, offering both in-person and telehealth therapy to children, teens, and adults throughout Michigan. If you are a Michigan resident and want to get started with therapy, including DBT, children's DBT, or other evidence-based therapies, please contact us at 616-719-0194 or find us on the web at www.adolescentfamilybhs.com.